He dumped a full bag of garbage on my head. Hot coffee grounds, spoiled meat, rotten bread right there in front of his fancy restaurant, as people laughed and filmed like I was street theater. Why? Because I was homeless. Because I sat too close to his spotless window. Because in his eyes, I didn't belong. But what he didn't know was this: I used to teach his children. I used to vote for his mayor. I used to be invisible. Until that night. Until the world saw what he did. And I finally found my voice. This isn't just a story about trash. It's about dignity, justice, and the moment a town was forced to choose between silence and truth. He dumped a whole bag of garbage over my head right there in front of the restaurant windows, like I wasn't even human. Coffee grounds, fish bones, wet noodles. All of it rained down on me as the laughter erupted from inside. "That's what you get for stinking up my sidewalk," he barked, holding the metal bin like a weapon of shame. Behind him stood the restaurant's proud sign glowing in warm yellow light, and behind that dozens of faces laughing, filming, turning away. My name is Ruth Taylor. I'm 72 years old, a retired school teacher, a mother, a grandmother, and, for the last 6 months, homeless. I never thought my life would come to this. I used to grade papers, make tuna casserole kiss scraped knees. Now I collect scraps, sleep behind dumpsters, and pray the rain won't soak through the last blanket I own. I live in Westover, small town, big pride. A place where kindness used to mean something. But that night in front of Jackson's kitchen, kindness was dead, and the man holding the trash bin was Gerald Jackson, the owner, the self-proclaimed king of hospitality, and the town's biggest hypocrite. He wore a white apron like armor, and smiled like a politician on TV. No one ever said no to him. Not the Chamber of Commerce, not the mayor, not the townsfolk who lined up for his overpriced lobster bisque. He didn't just serve food, he served power. And that power was aimed at me. It started 3 nights ago when I sat quietly outside his restaurant with my cardboard sign. Just hungry, not dangerous. I didn't ask for much, just leftovers. Just a warm drink, maybe a muffin if they had one. But Gerald didn't see a hungry woman. He saw a blemish. A threat to his Instagram perfect storefront. The first night he sent a waitress to shoo me. The second night he turned the hose on me. And tonight he made a show of it. A public shaming. The trash slid off my shoulders as I sat, frozen, drenched in food waste, feeling every pair of eyes avoid mine. Except for one. A little boy, maybe 6 years old, stood at the window clutching a grilled cheese sandwich. He didn't laugh. He didn't flinch. He just stared wide-eyed, confused, maybe even hurt. His mother pulled him away quickly, embarrassed. Not by me. By him. By his decency. I didn't cry. I don't cry anymore. Not since the eviction. Not since the hospital bills for my husband's cancer drowned everything we ever saved. Not since I lost the house, the photos, the box of letters we used to read on anniversaries. That night, I rose slowly, one creaking joint at a time, and I walked away. Not toward the shelter, not toward the alley. I walked into the dark with something new burning inside me. I don't know what to call it. It wasn't rage. It wasn't revenge. It was something quieter, older, deeper, like the weight of 1,000 swallowed insults pressing against my ribs. And something inside whispered, "They've gone too far, Ruth. Far enough." I made my way to the public library just before it closed. I didn't go there for warmth. I went for Wi-Fi, for truth, for a way to fight back. My fingers trembled as I typed, still sticky with soup and shame, but my voice was clear. I opened a new account. No photo, just a name, Voice of the Sidewalk. And I wrote, tonight in Westover, a restaurant owner dumped trash on a homeless grandma. Not because she screamed, not because she stole, but because she sat, quietly, with a sign. He said she didn't belong. But I do. I raised your kids. I taught your math. I paid my taxes. I buried my husband. And I'm still here, still human, even when you pretend I'm not. I clicked post. Then I clicked send to the local paper, to food blogs, to justice forums. I didn't expect anyone to care, but someone did. Then another, and another. By morning, my story had 3,000 shares. By noon, 50,000. I watched in disbelief as hashtags bloomed like wildflowers in digital fields. Garbagegate. Grandma deserves. Respect, shame on Jackson. They didn't know my name. But they knew the truth. And somewhere deep inside me, in a place long buried beneath blankets and bruises and broken faith, I smiled. Not with triumph. Not yet. But with something close to hope. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't invisible. And neither was what he did. I woke up on the library steps with the rising sun painting the sky a guilty orange. The cold still lingered in my bones, but the ache inside me was different. Not hunger, not shame. Something more electric, more alive. The library doors hadn't even opened yet, when a teenage girl in a pink hoodie crouched down in front of me and whispered, "Are you the grandma from the video?" I blinked. What video? She showed me her phone. There I was, grainy footage me soaked in trash, sitting still, while Gerald hurled insults with the smugness of a man who thought the world was still on his side. The caption read, "This is how Westover treats its elders." It had 500,000 views. I didn't remember anyone filming, but someone had. Someone had seen and decided not to look away, and now the whole town had seen too. I stood up slowly, not out of fear this time, but out of focus, out of mission. I was never a beggar. Not really. I was a woman surviving, and now I was a witness. The girl handed me a coffee. She didn't ask for a selfie. She didn't ask me to perform sadness. She just said, "You deserve better," and walked away. I clutched that cup like it was a trophy. The warmth seeped into my skin, and I knew I wasn't alone anymore. Not truly. But I also knew Gerald Jackson wasn't the kind of man to sit quietly while the world turned against him. I didn't have to wait long. By noon, he held a press conference outside his restaurant, complete with camera crews, a staged charity table, and a fake apology smile that barely cracked the surface of his plastic face. It was a misunderstanding, he said. Adjusting his tie, I didn't know she was homeless. I thought she was harassing customers. Lies. All of it. He knew. He always knew. He saw me every night. And the worst part, the town wanted to believe him. Westover was built on illusion, on polite smiles and clean streets and hidden truths. Gerald gave them lobster rolls and ribbon cuttings. I gave them discomfort, truth, a reminder that all their comfort sat on the edge of someone else's desperation. But I wasn't going to disappear, not this time, not for him. I returned to the bench outside the park that afternoon. Same clothes, same cardboard sign. But this time I brought more than my story, I brought evidence. A folder, dates, times, statements. The waitress who quit 2 nights ago met me in secret and gave me her account. He told us to throw away food rather than donate it, she whispered. Said he didn't want the wrong type hanging around. I recorded her words. She let me. "Post it," she said. "People need to know." And so I did. Every night I sat beneath the oak tree by the diner and updated the world, one post at a time. Voice of. The sidewalk was no longer a whisper. It was a roar. Reporters started calling. Bloggers. Even a local councilman. They wanted my story. But I gave them more. I gave them Westover. The real Westover. A place where prosperity had a gate, and people like me weren't allowed in. A place where a man could pour garbage on a grandmother and still sleep in silk sheets. Until now. Because a strange thing was happening. People were waking up. They began bringing me food, not out of pity but solidarity. A nurse handed me hand warmers. A college student gave me a charger and hotspot. Even a local chef dropped off a bag of pastries and whispered, "I used to work for him." He fired me when I gave a muffin to a hungry kid. I asked for his name. He said, "Doesn't matter. Just keep going." I started to believe I could. But Gerald didn't stay quiet. On the fourth night, 2 officers showed up at the park. "You're loitering," they said. "City ordinance." I asked for the ordinance number. They didn't answer. I filmed everything, my voice calm, my words precise. "Are you aware I'm the plaintiff in an ongoing harassment case?" I asked. They looked at each other, then left. Not because they respected me, but because they knew now everything was being watched, recorded, exposed. Gerald wasn't the only problem. He was the face of something bigger, the system that lets power wear a smile and throw trash without consequence. And if I was going to bring him down, I had to go deeper. I had to find his cracks. I returned to the library. I scoured property records, permits, city grants. I found irregularities, conflicts, names of officials he donated to, patterns that reeked of collusion. I couldn't prove it yet, but I would, because I still had one thing left from my old life, my teacher's patience, my researcher's mind, my refusal to back down when truth was within reach. I wasn't a viral clip. I was Ruth Taylor. And this fight had just begun. The wind cut colder that night, but I didn't move from the bench. My spine ached, and my coat smelled faintly of rot. Remnants of Gerald's performance still clung to me like a scar that hadn't finished scabbing. But my phone was glowing. Comments rolled in by the hundreds, then thousands. Some were cruel, mocking my appearance, questioning my choices. But most were voices I'd never heard before, rising like a choir behind me. She was our teacher in '88. That's Mrs. Taylor. She taught my daughter to read. She deserves dignity, and yet, for all the public fury, the system stayed quiet. No charges, no official reprimand. Gerald remained behind his polished counters, plating overpriced salmon and shaking hands like nothing happened. But I had stirred the ground beneath his empire, and now it trembled. I learned that the city was planning a cleanup initiative, a thinly veiled excuse to sweep away the homeless for safety. Flyers were printed, meetings arranged. Guess whose name was suddenly on the agenda? Mine. Unsanctioned protest activity, they called it. Public disruption. Funny how sitting still could scare so many. I didn't attend the first meeting. Instead, I sent someone else. His name was Raymond, a war vet in his 60s who slept near the Riverwalk wrapped in duct-taped tarps. He used to be a jazz musician, still played invisible notes with his fingers when he thought no one was looking. Raymond stood up that night trembling but proud. He read a letter I wrote in pencil, signed Ruth Taylor, citizen of Westover. It wasn't a protest, it was a question. If one grandmother sleeping on a bench is a disruption, Then what does that make a city that lets her? The room went quiet. Then Gerald stood up red-faced, demanding I be banned from public spaces. She's manipulating the public, he said. She's turning our town into a circus. And yet the more he shouted, the more he revealed. He didn't want peace. He wanted silence. He didn't fear chaos. He feared truth. Because the deeper I dug, the uglier it got. I found tax filings that didn't match, employee complaints buried in HR cabinets, a busboy who'd been assaulted and paid off with hush money. I knew where to look. Teachers never stopped noticing details. And so I began compiling every form, every whisper, every thread of rot. Gerald caught wind of it. That's when the threats started. A brick through the shelter window. A dead rat left on my blanket. An anonymous message, disappear or we'll make you. I didn't flinch, not this time. Because I had something stronger than fear, I had witnesses. Followers. People watching. Truth might walk slow, but it always arrives. Then one morning a man in a brown suit showed up at the bench. He didn't introduce himself, just sat beside me with a paper bag and said I used to work for him. City planner. He bribed me in 2016. I turned slowly. He looked tired. Guilty. I kept my mouth shut too long, he added, pushing the bag into my hands. Inside was a flash drive, receipts, emails, photos. I felt my fingers tremble. This wasn't just a local scandal, it was systemic, city-funded cover-ups, bribes hidden under charity foundations. My mouth went dry. Why now, I asked. The man stared at the horizon, voice low. Because one day I saw my own mother sitting on the sidewalk, and no one helped her either. I didn't cry, not then. But I reached for his hand. We sat there a while, two strangers stitched together by guilt and grief watching pigeons fight over breadcrumbs. That afternoon, I uploaded the first batch of documents, redacted names, highlighted lines, titled the post, "This Isn't About Me Anymore." It exploded. National outlets picked it up. Hashtags turned into headlines. Westover was no longer just a town, it was a mirror, and people everywhere didn't like what they saw. Gerald's lawyer released a statement, cold and corporate, but public support kept slipping through their fingers like water. They called me names, agitator, fraud, attention seeker. But people saw through it, because the truth was too loud now, too stubborn, too human. One morning, I stepped outside the library and found a stranger waiting. She handed me an envelope. From someone who remembers, she whispered. Inside was a note, scrawled in blue ink. You read me Charlotte's Web when I couldn't sleep. I never forgot your voice. You're not trash. You're the thread that held us together. I broke then, not in pain, in grace. Because finally, after months of rot and rain and silence, someone remembered who I was. Not the woman under the garbage. The woman who gave her life to others and asked for nothing back. But now I was asking, not for food, not for shelter, for justice. And I wasn't asking alone. The mayor called it unfortunate. The city board called it complicated. But what it really was, what everyone refused to admit, was shame. Not mine, theirs. The town didn't know what to do with me now. I wasn't just the homeless lady anymore. I was the whistleblower, the memory, the mirror. I sat on that same bench every day, no longer invisible. The city tried to clean up its image, more flowers on Main Street, more press statements about dignity and inclusion. But they never said my name, never looked me in the eye. The restaurant was still open. Gerald still served champagne, still shook hands with tourists who hadn't read the headlines. But fewer locals came now. Some avoided me out of guilt. Others smiled shyly as if apology could pass through silence. The flash drive I'd received was only the beginning. More people came forward. A dishwasher, a former vendor, a young woman who said Gerald threatened to ruin her family's food truck business unless she stopped selling within 2 blocks of him. I documented everything. The folder grew fat. The posts grew louder. My audience grew into a movement. Voice of the Sidewalk became more than just a tag. It became a symbol, a community. I started receiving letters from all over the country. They evicted my mom, too. My dad sleeps in his car. Thank you for not disappearing. I taped them to my cart one by one like armor. The mayor couldn't ignore it anymore. A town hall meeting was called. Public. Televised. They said it was to reaffirm city values, but I knew it was a performance. I didn't plan to speak until I saw Gerald sitting in the front row, arms folded, smirking like the ending was already written. That's when I stood. My knees cracked. My voice didn't. My name is Ruth Taylor. I taught in this town for 35 years. I paid taxes. I baked cookies for your fundraisers. I held your children when they cried. And now you pretend not to see me. You let this man pour garbage on me and called it a misunderstanding. You let him buy silence, rewrite truths, and stand here like he's the victim. I'm not asking for charity. I'm demanding memory. And if this town has any soul left, it will stop pretending it doesn't owe people like me more than a trash bin. The room was dead quiet. No one clapped. No one moved. Except one person, a teenager, front row. She stood slowly. Then another person stood. And another. One by one they rose, not clapping, not chanting, just standing. A silent wave of bodies refusing to sit back down. Gerald's smirk twitched, then vanished. The mayor fumbled for words, but they didn't matter anymore, because the tide had turned, and I wasn't alone. Not anymore. That night someone left a note by my bench. They looked away before, but we won't anymore. A week later, an investigative report aired. An anonymous whistleblower inside City Hall. Maybe the man in the brown suit. Maybe someone else had leaked evidence of financial fraud tied to Gerald's businesses and local campaign funds. It was national news. I watched from the library window as reporters swarmed Jackson's kitchen. Gerald didn't answer. He slipped out the back. But the truth doesn't have a back door. It knocks, and it waits until you open. The restaurant closed for renovations, but everyone knew it was done, finished. Westover was stirring now, not just in anger, but in reckoning. People came to the park not to stare, but to sit, to listen, to ask, to remember. Some brought food, others brought stories. One night a young couple knelt beside me and said, "We're naming our baby Ruth." I wept then, for all the days I'd felt invisible, for the nights I'd been called garbage, for the people who still slept alone under cold stars, but mostly for the idea that maybe, just maybe, the world could be different. I had always known invisibility was the real weapon they used. Not violence, not rejection, but erasure. They didn't have to lay a finger on you when they could just pretend you weren't there. And for a long time I let them. I folded in on myself like old laundry, silent, small, forgettable. But when they poured garbage over me, they didn't erase me. They painted me in spotlight. They gave me volume. And for the first time I spoke loud enough to be heard beyond the sidewalk. After the town hall, I expected Gerald to fight back. He didn't disappoint. A glossy editorial appeared in the Westover Times, unsigned but clearly orchestrated by his people. It claimed I was exploiting public sympathy, that I staged the video for attention, that I was mentally unstable, refusing professional help, choosing to remain homeless. That last part pierced deep, as if homelessness were a lifestyle choice, as if I enjoyed shivering on a park bench or lining up at the shelter for a banana and stale toast. But worse than the article were the murmurs it awakened, whispers on corners, doubts planted like poison ivy. Maybe she's exaggerating. Who knows what really happened? He's done so much for the town. I'd seen this before. It's how good men protect bad ones, with polite conversations, with benefit of the doubt, with memory loss. And yet I didn't flinch, because this time I had more than truth. I had receipts, the digital kind, emails, recordings, screenshots, all time-stamped, all irrefutable. That flash drive from the man in the brown suit. It held more than financial fraud. It showed direct communications between Gerald and a sitting council member, manipulating zoning permits, silencing code violations, covering up worker injuries. I packaged the evidence, neatly submitted it to an independent watchdog group, and posted a redacted version online. Within 48 hours, a federal investigation was announced. Gerald Jackson's face was finally where it belonged, beneath the word indicted. The town panicked. His name was stripped from sponsorship banners. His restaurant's Yelp page filled with one-star reviews and protest photos. The sidewalk outside Jackson's kitchen, once pristine, now bore chalk messages from kids, Grandma Ruth matters, truth over trash, we see you now. But Gerald wasn't done. On a Tuesday morning, a man in a cheap blazer approached my bench with papers. A lawsuit. Defamation. He was suing me for irreparable damage to his reputation. I laughed. A deep, ragged laugh that startled the pigeons. He destroyed mine with a bucket of fish guts. I restored his with facts. The man shrugged. Just the messenger. I took the papers, folded them neatly, and posted them online too. The backlash was immediate. A well-known civil rights attorney messaged me. If you're willing, I'll take this pro bono. I wrote back 2 words, let's begin. The court date was set. I borrowed a gray coat from the shelter, cleaned my shoes with a toothbrush, and walked into the courtroom with my head held higher than it had in years. The media was there. Protesters held signs outside. Inside, I was just a defendant. But in that quiet room of echoing footsteps and scripted objections, I was also a survivor. Gerald took the stand first. He called me unstable, vindictive, obsessed. He said the videos were edited, the witnesses coerced, and the posts malicious. When it was my turn, I didn't raise my voice. I just showed the jury what they already knew. The footage, the files, the hospital bills, the eviction notice dated the same week Gerald received a tax break for community outreach. Then I said they thought I'd vanish, that shame would silence me, that poverty would make me forget who I was. But the sidewalk taught me something school never did. Dignity doesn't come from having a home. It comes from standing even when you're seated, from speaking even when you're ignored, from surviving even when they try to throw you away. You could hear a pin drop. When I stepped down, the judge looked at me not as a defendant, but as a witness, of truth, of resilience, of what happens when silence ends. The courtroom buzzed with whispers like bees trapped under glass. Reporters scribbled, cameras rolled silently, and Gerald sat stiffly at the defendant's table, jaw locked fingers drumming a rhythm of entitlement. He still thought he would win. He still thought money charm and carefully cultivated illusion could spin the truth like sugar. But power has a shelf life, and his had expired. The trial was no longer just mine, it had become the town's reckoning. Each witness that took the stand unraveled another layer of rot. A teenage waiter who had been fired for giving a sandwich to a homeless woman. A vendor denied permits because he refused to pay Gerald's suggested donation. A former accountant, trembling but resolute, who confirmed the falsified expense reports. The prosecution moved with precision, every point backed with hard evidence from the flash drive the whistleblowers the community. My attorney, calm and razor-sharp, only needed to show what Gerald had already buried truth. And then it happened. On the fourth day, a key piece of surveillance footage was submitted. It was taken from a backdoor security camera at Jackson's kitchen. The night Gerald dumped garbage over my head. The angle was clearer than the viral video. You could see his expression mocking, deliberate, full of disdain. And behind him in the corner of the frame, a line of employees watching silently. One young woman covered her mouth, another looked away. The jury watched the footage in silence. Then again, then again. The moment the bag hit me, the moment I didn't flinch, didn't scream. Just sat there covered in waste became the image that defined the entire trial. You could feel the shift in the room. Even Gerald's attorney paused before cross-examining. "Do you regret sitting there that night?" he asked a final desperate play. I looked at him, then the jury, then the crowd. "No," I said, because the only thing more painful than what he did would have been letting him do it to the next woman. The judge called for recess, and when we returned, the verdict came faster than anyone expected. Guilty on all counts of defamation, harassment, tax fraud, and obstruction. Gerald didn't shout. He didn't cry. He just sat there blinking like a man watching his reflection crack for the first time. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had doubled. A quiet, respectful gathering. Signs, candles, strangers hugging each other. They didn't cheer when the verdict was read. They stood, like they had in the town hall, like they had for truth. Gerald was taken into custody. His signature clipboard emblem of his restaurant reign fell to the marble floor as they cuffed him. No one picked it up, no one dared. A camera flash caught that exact moment. It made the front page of the New York Times from trash to truth, the fall of a small-town tyrant. I didn't smile. Not yet. Victory doesn't always come with balloons. Sometimes it comes with deep breaths, with the silence of finally being believed. That night I returned to the bench. Same coat, same shoes, but not the same woman. A little girl approached me. "You're the grandma who fought the mean man," she said. I nodded. She handed me a bracelet, plastic beads, clumsily strung but bright with care. This one says, "Strong." Mama helped me spell it. I wore it proudly, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Gerald had fallen. But the fight was never just about him. It was about everyone like him. Every hand that throws garbage, every smile that hides cruelty, every law written to silence the vulnerable. But tonight, he couldn't touch anyone. Not anymore. The world didn't change overnight. The restaurant stayed closed, its windows still papered over with old menus and silence. The city council held emergency meetings. Gerald's seat on the Chamber of Commerce was left vacant, and no one rushed to fill it. The town walked slowly through its awakening like a child shaking off a long, shameful nap. But something had changed. I could feel it in the way people spoke my name now, not as a cautionary tale, not as a nuisance, but with reverence, with memory. "Good morning, Miss Taylor," the grocer would say, slipping an extra apple into my bag. "Thanks for standing up," whispered the teenager at the checkout counter. Even the librarian, who once avoided eye contact, now asked me to speak at a community storytelling night. I told them no at first. I said I was tired, that I wasn't made for microphones. But then I saw the flyer, "We Hear You Now." And I went. I stood at the front of the library auditorium, once the only place that would take me in out of the cold, and looked into a room full of neighbors, teachers, veterans, single mothers, students, volunteers, once strangers who now sat shoulder to shoulder waiting. I told them the story not of Gerald, but of Ruth. Of the girl who learned to speak last because she stuttered. Of the young wife who gave up her dreams to care for a dying husband. Of the teacher who stayed late to help a child read. Of the woman who lost everything and found her voice beneath a pile of garbage. And when I finished, no one clapped. They stood, quietly, with dignity, as if applause wasn't enough, as if standing was the only gesture strong enough to honor survival. The lawsuit ended in my favor. Gerald's assets were frozen, his reputation in shambles. The settlement, I didn't take it all. I asked for one thing, that a fund be created to help the unhoused in Westover, named not after me, but after dignity, after truth, after memory, the Sidewalk Fund. They granted it. The city approved it. And within weeks, shelters had new blankets. The soup kitchen got new freezers, and a small resource center was opened, run by those who had once been told to vanish. I walk by it every morning. Some days I help fold laundry. Other days I read stories to the kids whose parents are still finding their way. One of them, a quiet boy with eyes too old for his age, once asked me, "Why do they listen to you?" I smiled and said, "Because I stopped listening to the ones who told me to stay quiet." That boy now wears a plastic bracelet that matches mine. It says, "Believe." The little park bench where it all started now has a plaque. It doesn't say my name. It says, "For the voices that refused to be silenced." One night, just after the leaves began to fall, I returned to that spot and sat under the old oak tree. A man in a worn coat joined me. Raymond, still humming invisible jazz. We didn't talk much, just listened to the wind pass through the branches, just breathed in peace. The kind of peace you don't inherit, the kind of peace you earn. When I look back now, I don't see trash. I see transformation. I see how one act of cruelty can ripple outward and awaken an entire town. I see how dignity once shattered can be reforged stronger than before. And I see you, whoever reads this, standing at your own crossroad. Maybe you've been thrown away. Maybe they've called you garbage. Maybe you've forgotten the sound of your own voice. But hear me now, you are not invisible. You are not disposable. You are not alone. If you're sitting on a sidewalk today, let this be the proof that you can rise. That truth is louder than shame. That justice may sleep, but it always wakes. And when it does, let it find you standing, like I did. In the end, it wasn't the garbage that broke me. It was the silence that followed. And yet it was that same silence I chose to shatter. What started with a single act of cruelty became a movement, a reckoning, a reminder that no human being is beneath respect. I was a grandmother with nothing left but my name, and I used it to make sure no one else would be thrown away like I was. Justice didn't come quickly. Dignity wasn't handed to me, but I earned it back one truth, one post, one stand at a time. And now I give this to you if you've ever felt unseen, unwanted, unheard. Remember this story. Remember Ruth Taylor. Because the meaning of life isn't in what we own, but in what we stand for. If this story moved, you don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true emotional stories that reveal the hidden battles behind everyday faces. We want to hear your voice. Leave a comment below. Have you ever witnessed injustice? What would you do if the world stopped listening? Share this video to remind the world sometimes the strongest voices come from the sidewalk.